The Vietnam War, more than just a backdrop for movies and protest songs, was a turning point that reshaped nations and challenged an entire generation's trust in government and themselves. It was a long, complicated, and divisive conflict, with echoes that still influence politics, culture, and foreign policy today. For the Vietnamese, it was the latest chapter in a centuries-long fight for independence. For the US, it was a Cold War battleground to stop communism. This wasn't a simple good versus evil story, which is why it remains so controversial. We'll untangle the roots, key moments, and lasting impact of a war that turned a regional struggle into an international crisis. From the Gulf of Tonkin to the Tet Offensive, we'll see how Vietnam became America's first televised war, fueling a powerful anti-war movement. The Vietnam War is a story of miscalculation, perseverance, and profound loss, leaving scars on both Southeast Asia and American society. So, grab your metaphorical helmet, we're diving into one of the most significant and misunderstood conflicts of the 20th century. To understand the Vietnam War, you have to go back, way back. For centuries, the Vietnamese resisted foreign domination, first from China, then from France, forging a fierce national identity. In the late 1800s, France seized Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, creating French Indochina and exploiting the region's resources. Resistance was constant, and out of this struggle emerged Ho Chi Minh, a revolutionary who blended nationalism with communism. Inspired by global ideas but disillusioned by Western betrayal, Ho founded the Viet Minh to fight for independence. World War II brought Japanese occupation, but after Japan's defeat, Ho declared Vietnam independent, only for the French to return, sparking the First Indochina War. The Viet Minh, with some US support, fought the French for 8 brutal years. This war set the stage for America's later involvement. The Vietnamese quest for self-rule was relentless, and the seeds of the next conflict were already sown. The struggle for Vietnam's future was just beginning. Why did the US get involved in Vietnam? The answer: the Cold War and the fear of communism spreading. After the Viet Minh defeated the French in 1954, Vietnam was split, Communist North under Ho Chi Minh and anti-Communist South. A planned election to reunify the country was blocked by the US and South Vietnam, fearing a communist victory. America's involvement began with advisors and aid, hoping to build a stable, non-communist South. But South Vietnam's government was corrupt and unpopular, fueling support for the communist Viet Cong. As the Viet Cong gained strength, US involvement deepened, especially after the disputed Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964. Congress gave President Johnson broad war powers, and the first combat troops arrived in 1965. What started as a small advisory mission quickly escalated into a full-scale war. The US was now fully committed to a conflict it barely understood. The stage was set for a long and costly struggle. Vietnam was a war like no other for American soldiers. No clear front lines, just a shadowy enemy blending in with civilians. The Viet Cong used guerrilla tactics, booby traps, and vast tunnel networks, turning the jungle into a deadly maze. US troops faced relentless psychological and physical challenges, from monsoon rains to constant ambushes. To fight back, America unleashed overwhelming firepower, B-52 bombings, chemical defoliants like Agent Orange, and helicopter assaults. Success was measured by body count, not territory gained. But despite superior technology, the US couldn't break the enemy's will. The North Vietnamese and Viet Cong fought for unification and independence, willing to endure staggering losses. Their strategy: outlast the Americans and erode support back in the US. The result was a brutal stalemate with no end in sight. The war's unconventional nature left deep scars on those who fought it. Vietnam became a test of endurance, not just firepower. As the war raged abroad, America was torn apart at home. For the first time, the horrors of war were broadcast nightly on TV, creating a credibility gap between official statements and grim reality. The anti-war movement exploded, starting on college campuses and spreading nationwide. Protesters condemned the war as immoral and the draft as unfair, while others saw dissent as unpatriotic. The country split into hawks and doves, with families and communities divided. Violent clashes erupted between protesters and police, and the social fabric seemed to unravel. 1968 was a year of chaos, war escalation, assassinations, and cultural upheaval. The Vietnam War became the central crisis, exposing deep rifts over patriotism, morality, and America's identity. The nation hadn't been this divided since the Civil War. The battle lines were drawn not just in Vietnam, but in the heart of America. In January 1968, the Tet Offensive changed everything. During the Vietnamese New Year, North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces launched surprise attacks across South Vietnam, even breaching the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. Militarily, the Communists suffered huge losses, but the psychological impact was devastating for America. The offensive shattered the illusion of imminent victory and widened the credibility gap. Public support for the war plummeted as Americans realized the conflict was far from over. Influential voices like Walter Cronkite declared the war a stalemate, shaking national confidence. President Johnson halted bombing and announced he wouldn't seek re-election. The Tet Offensive didn't just change the war, it toppled a president and set the U.S. on a path toward withdrawal. The myth of American invincibility was gone. Vietnam would never be the same. After Tet, the U.S. focus shifted from winning to getting out. President Nixon promised peace with honor and launched Vietnamization, gradually withdrawing U.S. troops while building up South Vietnam's military. But as troops left, Nixon secretly expanded the war into Cambodia and Laos, sparking outrage when the truth emerged. The 1970 Kent State shootings, where National Guardsmen killed 4 student protesters, shocked the nation and deepened divisions. Meanwhile, peace talks in Paris dragged on, stalled over the future of South Vietnam. Nixon used intense bombing to pressure North Vietnam, but progress was slow. Finally, in January 1973, the Paris Peace Accords ended direct U.S. involvement. American troops withdrew, POWs returned, and the war was officially over for the U.S. But for Vietnam, it was only a pause. The fate of the South remained uncertain. The war's end brought relief, but not resolution. America left, but the conflict's shadow lingered. Vietnam's future was still in the balance. The Paris Peace Accords brought a ceasefire, but not true peace. With U.S. troops gone and aid slashed, South Vietnam's army quickly crumbled under a final North Vietnamese offensive in 1975. Saigon fell in April, as desperate civilians and Americans scrambled for evacuation in chaotic, iconic scenes. North Vietnamese tanks rolled into the presidential palace, South Vietnam surrendered, and the country was reunified under communist rule. For some, it was a triumphant victory, for others, a moment of terror and loss. The new regime sent hundreds of thousands to harsh re-education camps, and millions fled as boat people, risking everything for freedom. Many perished at sea, but survivors built new lives in the U.S., Australia, and beyond. The war's end marked a new beginning for Vietnam, and a humanitarian crisis for refugees. The images of Saigon's fall became symbols of both hope and heartbreak. The legacy of the war would follow these refugees for generations. Vietnam was forever changed. The Vietnam War left deep scars on both nations. Vietnam lost millions of lives, its land devastated by bombs and chemicals like Agent Orange, with effects still felt today. For the U.S., over 58,000 service members died, and countless veterans returned to a divided, often hostile nation. The war shattered American confidence, fueling distrust in government and what became known as the Vietnam Syndrome. It changed U.S. foreign policy, making leaders wary of future military entanglements. Congress passed the War Powers Act to limit presidential war-making, and the draft ended, replaced by an all-volunteer military. The conflict forced Americans to question authority and the cost of ideological wars. Today, Vietnam is unified and growing, even enjoying friendly ties with the U.S., but the echoes of war remain. The Vietnam War stands as a lesson in the limits of power, the importance of understanding history, and the enduring cost of conflict. Its legacy continues to shape our world.